Hello and welcome to another episode of EKU Online's eCast series. EKU Online's mission is to change lives by providing access to affordable and high-quality degree programs in meaningful disciplines that positively impact our society. And we thank you for joining us today. Today, our guest is Dr. Jennifer Fairchild, who serves as professor in the Department of Communication and as program coordinator for eCampus. Having earned her PhD in communication from the University of Kentucky, Dr. Fairchild continues to extend her dissertation research involving women's narrative reconstruction post-miscarriage and the social support offered to women post-miscarriage. Dr. Fairchild teaches a wide variety of courses here at EKU, including interpersonal communication, health communication, leadership and change, intercultural communication, and gender and communication. Her dissertation work has been presented at meetings of the National Communication Association and the Southern States Communication Association. Her research also has been featured in such journals as PRISM, a Journal of Regional Engagement, Illness, Crisis, and Loss, Journal of the Scholarship of Teaching and Learning, Journal of Effective Teaching, and Communication Center Journal. Dr. Fairchild is the co-chair-elect of the Kentucky ACE Women's Network, and she is co-director of the EKU Faculty Innovators. She's the 2017 recipient of the Excellent in Online Teaching Award presented by the Office of eCampus Learning at Eastern Kentucky University. She's also the recipient of the EKU Student Government Association's Most Outstanding Distinguished Educational Leader Award, which was presented to her in May of 2018. Dr. Fairchild, welcome. Will you join us here on a very snowy, icy round 2 of 3 of a snowstorm here in Kentucky? And we thank you so much for your time today.
Thank you for having me.
So let's jump right in here. First off, Dr. Fairchild, please tell us a little bit about the communication department. How many faculty positions do you have, and what specific degree programs or certificates are offered online?
Sure. We have the Communication Studies Bachelor Degree program is offered completely online, which is a great opportunity for students. We have 5 faculty who teach those classes for eCampus. And right now, in addition to the BA in Communication Studies, we also have a university certificate that we offer in Communication Studies. And we have 2 department certificates in dispute resolution and workplace communication. So we believe those certificates would be beneficial to any student, any major in eCampus.
This is near and dear to my heart because I'm a communications major as well from many moons ago.
Love it.
Dr. Fairchild, as you counsel and advise students, where do you see many of them working after graduation? In other words, what kind of skills can students learn, and what kind of jobs can a graduate expect to land in the degree that he or she earns in communication?
One thing that my fellow faculty and I have been told over and over again from countless employers is I can teach a graduate how to do a certain job at my company. What I cannot teach is good communication. They need to know how to solve problems. They need to know how to listen, because listening is a part of communication. They need to know how to present their work in public. They need to know how to settle conflict in the workplace, because that's inevitable no matter what job you choose. So we see our students with those skills: conflict management, dispute resolution, communicating effectively in the workplace, learning to speak in public and listen. Those are the skills that our students get with this degree or certificate. And really, the jobs that we see, they vary from human resource management to pharmaceutical sales. Many of our students work in higher education. There's always a need for communication graduates in higher education. And a lot of them already have a job where they're able to move up the ladder with this degree or certificate. So I enjoy seeing people from various walks of life being able to move up a step. And I love it when my eCampus students tell me, you know what, I am really using these skills on the job right now. And I can already see how they're making me a better employee. So that's really satisfying.
So you are seen as an effective online instructor, but Dr. Fairchild, having won the eCampus Excellence in Online Teaching Award in 2017, can you just please share with our audience some tools or approaches that you use specifically to give your students a richer and more meaningful online learning experience?
Absolutely. Sam can attest. I use lots of video in my classes. He knows that because he helps me record and produce those. I want the students to have a face to go with a name and not just a thumbnail image of what I look like. I want them to feel like they know me. And I love it when students say, I loved your video that started out this week's module. It really did draw me in from the beginning. And that is what I want to do. I want them to know who I am. We use also YouTube videos because sometimes there's just a great concept on communication that somebody else has already explained, and there's no need for me to say it in a different way. So we'll have other video clips, not just me talking, but those kinds of things. We use discussion boards, we use blogs, we use different kinds of writing assignments. There's so many different ways to give students a rich and meaningful experience online. And I love it not just when it's me that they see in video, but I'm using things such as Flipgrid where I can see them in video too, because I love being able to see who they are and meet them where they are. So one thing I really appreciate about teaching for eCampus is that there's so much faculty development opportunities for me. So something that I'm using right now that I might think is really neat and novel might be something better next semester. And that's okay, because I think you just have to be willing to adapt to give those students the meaningful online learning experience that they deserve.
It is amazing. I think that EKU really prides itself in our instructors being, an actual face who teaches here on campus, who engages with the students. And I think so many of our faculty, and you, of course, are no exception, excel at relating that experience and that, that just personal nature to students. And that is not lost on them. I know that we get plenty of feedback from students who appreciate that so much. So again, thank you for being so good at what you do. It's just, it's palpable to our students, and I know they appreciate that.
Well, thank you for those kind words. I really appreciate it, and I enjoy what I do. I love it.
Well, it shows. So, I mean, on that note, I mean, what do you enjoy most about teaching online?
Oh, wow. Well, it's hard to think of just one thing that I enjoy, but one thing that I really do love is the fact that I can meet my students where they are. The eCampus program has a lot of working adults in the program. So 18 to who knows how old, right? Anybody can come back and decide, hey, it's time for me to finish my degree. And I love being able to see those students set those goals and say, you know what, I've been at this position for 10, 15 years, and I can't get promoted unless I finish this degree. And life happened when I was 20 and things got in the way. So I really enjoy the opportunity to see those students succeed and then get to see them at graduation, because many of them in our pre-COVID days, they would come to EKU for their graduation. And that was so rewarding to see that. I think that's one of my favorite experiences, in addition to those emails that I get a year or 2 or 5 years down the road that say, hey, you may not remember me. Most of the time I do, but they'll say, you may not remember me, but I had you for this class 5 years ago, and I'm still using what I learned in your class in my job today. And I just wanted to say thank you. So sometimes, we say learning never ends, but sometimes it takes a year or 2 or more for students to make that connection of, hey, I learned that in my class, EKU Online, and I'm still using it in the workforce. That's really rewarding too.
It's interesting to think about that so many of our online students don't actually get to meet their instructors in person until graduation. But I do think that really contributes to the turnout that we have for our online students coming to graduation. And of course, that's the same experience that any campus student would have, scholastically and otherwise, socially. But it's tricky with the world the way it is right now to not be able to have that experience, and potentially not have that this coming semester and all that. So I know that.
Yes, I miss it for sure.
I think we all do. It's definitely the icing on the cake or the payoff for all the hard work that goes in on both sides. So let's drill down a bit here and talk about one of your courses, CMS 375, which is intercultural communication. The world seems to be ever shrinking with the global economy, the internet, and social media. How do we effectively and in a meaningful way get over the cultural and communication barriers that still kind of pervade so much of our society?
I love teaching intercultural communication. I think it's a very relevant class in the global and political climate that we live in right now. And I know one of the first times that I traveled abroad, I was still college age, and I can remember our tour guide saying, it's not wrong, it's just different. And as a 20-year-old who wanted ice in her Diet Coke in London, and I was like, why won't these people put ice in their drinks? I don't want to drink it lukewarm. What is going on? And she would say, Jennifer, it's not wrong. It's just different. So that's something I have taken, and I try to teach that in my intercultural communication class all the time, that we have to really get to that place where we understand each other and understand that because somebody does something in a different way that's culturally acceptable to them, it isn't wrong. It's just a different way of seeing the world. And I think that this class has been very beneficial, not just for CMS students, but this year we've gotten social work students, management students, you name it. We've had people who realize, you know what, I am going to work and communicate in a global economy. And I need to understand how to do that in a way that's respectful to the other culture and that honors that person's beliefs.
So these last few years in our political and media venues, they've just demonstrated how not to communicate effectively. You turn on a news show, it seems whoever's talking the loudest or is yelling the loudest is the one who gets heard. In the political realm, meaningful discourse just seems to almost be virtually non-existent. First off, what are your thoughts about this? And second, can we ever get back to a focused discussion on key issues that face both our state and our country?
Well, as an educator, it probably will not surprise you that I see this about the loudest person is the one who gets heard. It goes back to how maybe in some parts of our society, we have lost that emphasis on the value of education and on the fact of agree to disagree. I'm not exactly sure when that happened. I think I might have a hunch that it happened when social media became so prevalent that we no longer were able to agree to disagree with people. And I think having friends and even relatives who have different political belief systems from me is fascinating. If I can work with them and communicate with them in a respectful manner. That has been lost. And I might be too Pollyanna to think that we can ever get back to the way it once was. But I think that we have to understand that we have to do the research for ourselves. And we have to really, I've even gotten on to my husband because he watches a lot of news and he watches it from the same station all the time, never flips the channel. And I'm saying, you know what, maybe you need to just look at another side. Even if you think that other side could be wrong, it would be really good just to hear how they're framing a story. So at least you understand the other viewpoint. I've also encouraged him to watch PBS because I think that PBS does a great job of just being, here's the facts. We're not putting a spin on it. There's no celebrity coming in to give a viewpoint. This is just the facts, the way things are. So I think there are some things we can do, but it also goes into personal responsibility and being educated and making those decisions for ourselves.
A great answer. It is very easy with social media now to just kind of build an echo chamber for ourselves and just assume that because we're surrounded by that we're always right or that they're always wrong or whatever combination of that.
Exactly. The echo chamber is very dangerous.
Absolutely.
Very, very scary. Yes,
Yeah.
I agree.
How do you address the nature of that in classes with students who have grown up with that language per se?
Yeah, well, I see that just because I have a teenage son. And I think once a day, my husband and I say to him, just because it's on the internet doesn't make it true. And he'll say, well, this YouTube star or this so-and-so said, and then it's a conspiracy theory. So I can see how easy it is for somebody to go down that rabbit hole. And I think it is something where we spend a lot of time in communication studies talking about evaluating sources. We work really closely with our librarians. We've done a great job, I believe, incorporating media literacy into our curriculum as much as possible. And I think that's part of it too, is that just because somebody printed it or published it online does not make it factual or true. And you have to keep challenging yourself all the time because it's easy to buy in. Oh, well, so-and-so said it. Well, that's not really factual. Doesn't make it true.
So on that note, what about texting? Do you talk about this topic in your communication classes? Again, I think this is, going to age us out generationally, but this isn't something we had until later in life. So do you allow your students to text you for questions or concerns? I mean, that's a different barrier and a more informal way of communicating with people, but it seems more commonplace now, obviously. So.
Yes, and all of my experiences, not just me, but other CMS faculty, anytime we've shared our number and said you can call or text us, either one, we get very few students who take us up on that. So I do think it's interesting because people always have their phone in their hands these days. So that would be a very easy thing to do. A lot of our students still seem more comfortable with email, but they absolutely know that they can call me, they can text me. And if there's something that's pressing and urgent, that is a really good way, even though it is more informal, a type of communication. I think it really helps them feel better. Like, oh, I can ask her this question. I don't have to wait until she checks her email for an answer. They do realize it's more of an instant reply, and they are very respectful. I don't get any text at 2 a.m. or anything like that. People are really respectful of your time. But yes, we certainly allow that for our students to text us for questions.
Dr. Fairchild, have you noticed in online education that the fundamental nature of it provides a vehicle for students who may be not necessarily the ones who would speak up in a classroom environment, but provides them maybe a more comfortable environment to do so? Have you noticed correlation there in your courses, or have you gotten feedback from students in that regard?
I've absolutely noticed that because I know when I started teaching, and of course this was on the ground teaching back in the day, I had a mentor who told me, do not make that mistake of assuming the quiet students are not learning. She said most of the time they're the thoughtful students. They're processing things over. They want to think about it before they, blurt out an answer in class. So that was really an eye opener for me. And I see that in the online environment, the opposite. It's the quiet, the thoughtful students who have a lot to say, and maybe if we were in a face-to-face context would not say it, but they're able to contribute to the blogs, the journal entries, the discussion boards in a way that feels like a safe place for them to do so. And once again, we have students who are very respectful of that online learning community. They keep the post to the nature of what we're discussing. It's not just a time for them to get on a soapbox and rant. We have students who are very respectful of that. So I do think that online learning, especially I'm an introvert myself, and a lot of people don't realize that because I love to teach. When you're an introvert, what you love to do, you become an extrovert. But the rest of my life, I'm very much an introvert. So I can appreciate the quiet, thoughtful people who really seem to thrive in the online learning environment.
I would not have known you were an introvert. That's really funny to hear you say that. So that's
Yep. That's what people say. Yeah, that's one of those things I could probably win 2 truths and a lie with, because I really am introverted, but not when I'm teaching, not when I'm doing that.
You play a great extrovert on TV. So
That's right.
Shifting gears a bit. Please tell us a bit about your research interests, Dr. Fairchild. You've done a number of different research projects. In your introduction, we mentioned that you are continuing your dissertation interest in women's narrative, reconstruction, post-miscarriage, and the social support offered to women post-miscarriage. Please tell us some more about that.
Yes, so what we talked about in the introduction really was what my dissertation was about. So about women and them telling the story of their miscarriage. And you have to think, when I went to school, it's been a little while, I'm dating myself, but I remember being very upset by the fact that I could go into a Hallmark store. Remember when those existed and we could go buy a card at Hallmark, and I could find a card that said, I'm sorry, your pet passed away. But at that time, there were no cards that said, I'm sorry you miscarried a baby. It had even become, at that point, the only place I could find research about it was in nursing journals. And that was a little more clinical. It wasn't really about social support, and how we had to acknowledge the fact that that was a loss. And it was a loss for that family. It wasn't just a loss for the woman who miscarried. So that's where my dissertation work started. And then I was very lucky that the person who was my dissertation advisor, he said, I think you have a lot of other research that could be done in this field. So one thing that I worked on with him, Michael Arrington is his name, was a work about depiction of husbands in miscarriage accounts, because we realized when we interviewed the women for my dissertation, most of them talked about they received support from their partner, their husband, their significant other, but we never really acknowledged the fact that that was also a loss for that person. So we went back and did a little more research after I graduated with my doctorate about the depictions of how husbands received social support. So not just how they supported their partner, but how people supported them, because it was a loss for them as well. And then we did a little more work on pregnancy loss narratives. So those are some of the ways that I've extended my dissertation research. I'm happy to report now that it's been about a decade or so since I've finished my graduate work, that it is more common. And once again, this could be a positive thing about social media. We talked about the negatives before, but I believe with social media, people have opened up about infant loss or miscarriage awareness. And you will hear so many people say, this happened to me, or this happened to my wife, or this happened to my partner. And people are able to talk about it more than they were in the early aughts when I was in graduate school. So I guess that's a positive that we can say people are able to share and they have a place to talk about it. Because that was the one thing I learned was that most people wanted to say something, but they didn't know what to say. And they wanted to do something to support their friends who had experienced that kind of loss as a miscarriage, but they didn't know how. So I think a lot of times people would just do nothing, which was more hurtful than if you had tried and maybe bumbled, and said something that wasn't totally appropriate. But the worst thing you can do is just sit idly by and say nothing.
That's really powerful stuff. I mean, I guess I didn't know that your research involved that area. And I do appreciate what you say about social media, because as many pitfalls as there are some pretty inherent benefits as well. And the support aspect, absolutely. I think people would all agree on that. That's one of the major benefits of it, is just being able to gain that support from sometimes total strangers.
Absolutely. And I think that was one thing when I did my dissertation work was, many women said they just felt so alone because they didn't know if anybody else had had that kind of experience like a miscarriage. And sometimes, people don't even know they've experienced a miscarriage. So it's very hard to get the numbers on that. Now we say either 1 in 5 or up to 1 in 7 women could experience a miscarriage. So you're not alone. It's not an isolated event. It happens to a lot of people. And then another thing was, women would say why, and they couldn't get an answer to why, because sometimes it is just that event that happens. And only if 1 or 2 women had gotten the message from their doctor, you did nothing wrong. This happened because of, but a lot of times it just happens. And I think that was really frustrating as well. But yes, you're right that social media has at least given people, even if it is the company of strangers, it's strangers who have had that same experience, and they may understand you even better than a loved one or a good friend could.
What a great and powerful area to be researching in. So that's really, really fascinating stuff. COVID-19 has changed everything operationally, it seems like, on so many levels of society and business and education, communication. If you could just give us some idea on how COVID is affecting communicate. I mean, you and I are doing an interview we would normally be doing face to face in the studio. So could you just touch on how COVID has affected communication?
Yes, well, I think that communication is one of those tricky things anyway. And I think that we always have to talk about how I could say something to you, but you might interpret it in a different way from how I intend it. So now multiply that by 1,000 or however many you want with the COVID communication, because most of our communication isn't in person anymore. So we have to really think about ways, one, how can we be cutting edge, whatever that might be, to get our message across to each other? And how do we truly listen to each other while doing that? I know that some people have said, they're thankful for Zoom, they love Skype, they love those kinds of opportunities. And whether or not you love it, you have to learn how to deliver your message in a way where it's effectively received. So if you are teaching like I am, if you're using Zoom to help you teach, you have to think of a way to engage with your class and how to get your students to feel like that they are really learning, even though they can't be with you in that classroom environment at the time. I will tell you one thing, that with COVID, I know that a lot of people were panicked back in March, thinking, oh my gosh, how am I going to get my classes online? I was so thankful that I already taught for eCampus and that I have gone through Quality Matters training, and I have worked with the IDC. And not that I'm perfect, but I felt like I was in a much better place to be able to move my traditional classes online than maybe some other people were. So I was very thankful for those opportunities, because I enjoy teaching online more than I enjoy teaching on Zoom, if I'm being honest, because I know that that's something in my wheelhouse. And I feel like I'm pretty good at teaching online, and that my students are still getting a good quality education, even if I'm not in the classroom with them.
I do think we've noticed, just as the eCampus group, our faculty by and large were the least disrupted by that, because there had already been this infrastructure set up and they already spoke that language and they already had all these tools in place to make that experience really meaningful. and rich for their students. So as it has disrupted so many things, for once in our lives, eCampus was the least disrupted by something like that, which was one less thing to worry about. Let's just say that.
Absolutely. I was so grateful because I teach health communication. Now, that's not an eCampus class, that's a traditional in-person class, but I had already set up my class in modules, just like I had learned in Quality Matters. So that class hasn't truly passed a Quality Matters review, but I felt like I had it ready to go. So as soon as we went to online, I said, my students know what they're doing because we already have modules. We'll just keep going. We just won't do the in-person meeting, from here on out. But it made me feel for once, like you said, I was at the cutting edge instead of being behind the curve. So
It's a very nice place to be,
Mhm.
even if you only get a few of those in your life.
Exactly.
That's a good one. Tell us a little bit about yourself, Dr. Fairchild. You are a very engaged instructor. You are doing research. You have a family. When do you have time for fun, and what do you do for fun?
Well, right now I have a lot of time for fun, but I have nowhere to go for fun. So I think one thing I miss the most is travel. I really do like to travel. And actually, just right before, probably the nick of time, I had taught abroad with one of my other eCampus colleagues, Krista Kimmel. She and I had taught the winter 2019 study abroad class in London. So, COVID was probably there. We just weren't aware of it at that time because we got home in January 2020. But I loved being able to teach students who were going abroad for the first time. That was so much fun. So that combined my love of travel and teaching. So I really hope that I get to do that again in the post-COVID world when I can get back to London safely. And I do love spending time with my family, which of course COVID has given me lots of time with my family. Normally we like to travel or go places or watch my son play soccer. We haven't really been able to do that as much. But I think one thing COVID has taught me is that you just have to appreciate what you have and you can't really worry about tomorrow. Just try to really enjoy today. I'm much of a planner and I love to plan way ahead. And I've just kind of learned I can't really do that anymore. But I do look forward to the day that I can travel again with my family, spend time with them. And in the duration, I'm reading. I love to read. I was an English major in college. I thought for a long time I'd be a high school English teacher or a librarian because I love reading so much. So that is one thing that COVID has granted me is lots of time. I always have a book in my hand. So anytime I have 30 minutes or whatever, I will read a chapter or two in my most recent favorite book. So I do love reading.
As we wind down here, Dr. Fairchild, is there anything else you'd like to share with our listeners?
Well, I hope this isn't too big a statement to leave you with, but I would like to say that communication is everything. And most of the problems that we have in this world is because we don't listen to each other or we don't communicate as clearly as we thought. So let's always think about what our intended message is and how we would want that person to receive it. And also think about we spend way more time every day listening than we do speaking. So we can always work on improving our listening skills as well. That's such an important part of communication.
Dr. Fairchild, thank you so much for your time today. It's always a pleasure to see you and look forward to working with you again soon on some future projects and creating some new content for online courses as soon as the world allows us to do so.
Well, thank you so much for having me. I was really honored when you all asked me to do this. So thank you again for interviewing me.